So welcome, Phil and Chuck. Thanks for agreeing to do this. Scott Woods here, and with Phil Dellio and Chuck Eddy, who I've talked to both before. Phil about a million times, Chuck maybe just a dozen times or something, half a dozen times. But Phil just released, so I should say released too, because he self-published a brand new book, Happy for a While. I'm going to forget the subtitle. American Pie 1972 and the Awkward, Confusing Now. Obviously, it all sort of hinges on the song American Pie, and you go off into a bunch of different directions. And you did just self-publish it. Congratulations. I think it's a fantastic book. You got some really good, you got some really good comments and stuff through Facebook. And I know one guy on Expert Witness, Steve Pick, did an excellent review
that
of it.
really
So
surprised me. And Chuck wrote a nice post, and Jeff Pike wrote a nice post, and Howard wrote a nice post. Yeah.
Yeah, Steve Pick was the music critic for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch for, I think.
I looked him up today. I didn't know who he was. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
really nice.
I mean, I think he works in a record store, manages a record store, something like that.
That's what his Substack said.
He was the he had that gig for forever.
Was he a Paz and Job guy too then?
He absolutely was, yes.
Okay.
Wow. So is he about our age then, or
a little older, I believe? I think he might be. I think he's a couple years older than me, which would put him about 64, maybe.
Oh, he did say something in his review about how, I can't remember the way he framed it, but he was definitely familiar with the song at the time, and he just sort of, after its sort of run on the chart was over, he never listened to it again for decades or something. Did he say that, or am I thinking?
He said something like that, and it sounded like, I mean, I can't remember what his trajectory listening to music was, but it sounded similar to mine, where he wasn't really paying close attention until New Wave happened.
Okay.
I think that's what he said. Either that, or maybe he switched gears then. But and I think that later he kind of went back and looked at the times before times.
Stephen Rubio has always put something nice up, and he just flat out said he doesn't like this song. You know, it's one of the.
But not the book. He likes the book, but not.
Oh yeah, no, he wrote something nice about the book, but the song. In fact, you know, that was part of it. That I guess he liked the book enough that it cut him over the fact that he just doesn't like the song at all.
And of course, I have to mention that Chuck himself wrote the foreword, and it's a very hefty foreword, a few thousand words, and I think it's great too. It really, I don't know how to describe it. Like it takes your book kind of as a launching pad, and sort of just kind of goes into it just sort of deepens the story or extends the story. It's obviously through Chuck's eyes. So
I think of it like a sidebar. I mean. Like, you know, if you have a long magazine feature, it's the sidebar where it's sort of, I mean, the thing is, my idea with there is like to go off on some tangents that Phil hadn't got to, that were just kind of came to my mind. I just kind of, you know, jotted down notes as I
Yeah, you caught some great stuff that you know, was way off what I was thinking about, and yet fit perfectly.
Curiously, I can never remember how to spell the word forward. In there.
I goofed that up too. I think I actually misspelled it in an edition of one of the books and had to correct that. I spelled it the other forward. And I also would get very confused as to what constituted a forward and what constituted a preface.
Or a preface or an introduction.
What's a prologue?
A prologue. Well, I think I knew a prologue would be from the actual author, but you know, the other, introduction, preface, forward. What's the difference?
Introduction is by the author.
Maybe an intro is by the author too. But
so the question is, what's the difference between a prologue and an intro?
Yeah.
Weird. Okay, let me kick off
between an epilogue and a postscript. Okay, go ahead.
And an epigram.
An epigram.
Okay, so Phil, I'm gonna start us off with a sort of question. It's actually more just putting something out there and you can respond to it. But you know, obviously familiar with your writing for years and years, as Chuck has been, and it's no surprise, you know, that you're going to tackle 1972 in a book in some way. You've been writing about it forever. I think even if I were to look back at radio-ons and stuff, I don't know if you mentioned like 1972 specifically that often, but you just wrote about stuff sort of from that era, you know, whenever you could.
You could go back to Nerve, the big thing I did on all that soul music. And I'm sure the focus would have been 72. You know, it's
So,
mostly about the shy lights and stylistics.
I mean,
So
the two
you've
of you did a book on the 70s. I
What's
guess I
that?
didn't
yeah,
realize,
yeah.
well, you did a book on the 70s. I never realized it was that specific, 1972.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think we really, the book that Scott and I did didn't have any kind of focus like that at all. It was all based on sort of genres and songs that went together, and 72 had no special significance.
And I
Yeah, and
think
in some ways, I Want to Be Sedated is almost like, not literally, but it's almost more of a book that starts in 1973 in some ways, right?
It
Like
does.
it's
Yeah,
K-Tel, it's K-Tel plus kind of thing.
very
So
much so. I think we said in the first few chapters, you know, there's something about the 70s started just like you'd expect. The 60s hung around for a couple of extra years, just
wait,
like the 60s are a continuation of the 50s, right? Until
does
63
K-Tel
or
actually
60.
start in 1973? I mean, I can't
well,
remember.
I think literally it might have come into existence earlier.
Yeah.
But I think we just looked at the hits from 73 and the K-Tel style of hits, and it just seemed to really take off that year. I mean, I can't remember
They
the
come in,
particulars now,
honestly,
but
they start to come in almost the second half of 72. You know, when I say I revere 72, I realize I'm really talking about the first half of the year. If you look at the charts in the second half, you're kind of into the K-Tel era. There's a lot of junk, which it's not all junk. You know, I always like to differentiate that there's great K-Tel stuff, but there's some horrid stuff.
I'm
Even
only,
my family is later in the year.
I'm only laughing at what you just said because that's like the most specific sort of thing to like
I only
I'm
like,
a fan of the first
I
six
know,
months of
I like
1972. That's the
January.
period I revere.
February
So,
wasn't
so
good. March 72 was great. April, not
yeah.
so great.
Well, doesn't Marcus in the back of Mystery Train, I mean, talk about how all the Papa was a Rolling Stone, the post Superfly, which is different than what you call the neoclassic soul stuff. Doesn't
Right.
he talk about that basically centered in the second half of 72?
Um, Maybe the soul music got really strong. Yeah, that's possible. And yet, I don't know. I looked at the number ones for the second half of the year, and to me, they're just not nearly as strong. But that's because I love the singer-songwriter stuff. Somebody else might look at the early singer-songwriter stuff and say, you know, this year didn't get good until later. It just depends how
Yeah.
you look at it.
Okay, so on the 1970 on the topic of
Yeah.
1972, you did something that I probably wouldn't have guessed a few years ago. I thought, oh, at some point Phil's going to write a book about 1972 and it's going to be a personal, sort of memoir. And you do all that stuff, but what you
Yeah.
do different, obviously, is the book coalesces around American Pie. Um,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't have seen that coming. I don't think we even talked about the song American Pie before
Yeah.
thinking you were going to
Well,
write a book about. But talk about how
sure.
1972 in your telling of it coalesces around Don McLean's American Pie.
Okay, obviously that had a lot to do with the nature of the series that it was originally intended for, where I was, it was Duke University's series of books on one song. So, and I wish I could go back to that moment where because usually, we see this stuff all the time, Scott, you and I, and we rarely follow up. I've already had a 33 1/3 turned down. I wasn't much in the mood for sending in a proposal, but the idea of American Pie came to me right away, having read the description of what they were looking for, which was a song with some, whatever cultural impact and et cetera, et cetera. And when I thought of that, I'm still amazed at how fast I came up with a proposal. It was like within hours, I had all those chapters and I had the chapter titles and how to position that song made perfect sense to me. And I realized that I could also do that other book on 72. That's sort of the first chapter, I guess, which
Mhm.
is the most memoir-like. And then I get into the specific, the three things, the kind of cross section of singer-songwriters, really long songs, and the 50s nostalgia. But to get back to your question, it was never American Pie. Just fit the format perfectly. And then when I had to come up with alternate ideas, there were other songs that didn't make as much sense, like "Hello, It's Me" or "Badfingers Day After Day." Roberta Flack's first time ever I saw your face, that did make sense, but when I go into all this in the book, it would have been a harder book for me to write.
Well, I mean, American Pie makes sense. I mean, when I saw that that's what you had, the song you had done, it just, I mean, it immediately, I thought, well, I mean, it crams, you know, whatever you think of the song, it crams the history of rock and roll into, you know, plus it's long enough that you know, there's a lot in there, but
There's a book, yeah.
I
That's
mean,
true.
it might make sense to do a really long song, but a really long song that tries to encompass the history of rock and roll makes, I mean, it's a book in itself. So yeah,
And it was an important song at the time. I was surprised to find out there's never been a book on American Pie. All I could
Yeah.
find, or even Don McLean, all I could find was like a songbook. That plus his children's book. No one's ever written a book. I wouldn't think necessarily anybody, even before what happened, anybody would want to write a book on Don McLean himself. But I would have thought there might have been a song on the book.
A book on the song.
We make mistakes.
Someone will still write a
all
song
the
about
time.
your book.
Yeah, the song on the book. I thought there would have been a book on the song or something. Maybe, I don't know.
Does he
That's-
have any kind of? I mean, I mean, is there anybody who considers Don McLean in general an important art? I mean, critics or you know, just
Yeah,
industry.
I'd be surprised. I'd be
So you didn't
surprised.
come across it. There's not like no defenders of his.
Well, I found, you know, those three quotes that start the book. To me, those are great. I mean, four Rob's comes later, but the Marcus, the Greg Shaw, and the Kirstigal, even though the Marcus
Lester Bangs, not Crisco.
Lester Bangs, Kirstigal, Greg Shaw, and Marcus.
No, not Crisco.
Lester Bangs. Okay.
You're
Lester
right.
Bangs. You keep
Call
saying
Chris.
Crisco.
You're right. Yeah.
It's okay. Lester Bangs,
because he's in
Greg
the book so
Shaw,
much.
and Grill
Yeah.
Marcus. Yeah.
Real Marcus.
Sheffield.
Those
And
three
Chef and Rob
quotes-
Sheffield. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of putting Rob's to the side only because it came in a fanzine years later. Marcus's came much later, but you can tell he's talking about how he felt in 1972, right?
Right.
And Greg Shaw's and Lester Bangs were written right then. I'm glad those quotes are there because it shows that at least for three of the critics at the time, it was a revered song. So to answer Chuck's question, I don't think McLean himself has ever had, you know, critical champions, but the song has at least three, I think, pretty important writers from 1972.
Does Marcus put it in the back of Stranded?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, I
okay,
think it is.
sorry. Yeah, because the quote I took was from Scott's
Right.
website. But yeah, it is in Stranded. You're right.
Okay, it is. I mean, I was asking.
Yeah, it is in
Yeah.
Stranded. Yeah, it's in the
Yeah.
discography. I actually was thinking about this even just this evening before we got on the call. I got really curious. The one person who I was kind of surprised, maybe it doesn't exist or you didn't find anything by, was Dave Marsh, because he seemed like he would have
I
been the
looked up,
perfect.
yeah.
So I looked up the Rolling Stone record guide, and he does co-write the Don McLean reviews, and this will
Oh, I
answer
didn't
your
even check
question a
that.
little bit, Chuck. He does say him and I think it's Bart Testa, maybe BT, who Phil used to know, right?
My film professor.
Your old
Wow.
professor.
Oh, really?
But he
Yeah.
wrote laudatory things about the song American Pie, but literally I think every album gets like a, you know, what is it, the 1 star or the square or whatever the insignia is. Like he thinks it's pretty loathsome stuff or whatever. And Chris Gow too, I looked at his review. I think his original grade was a D
Yeah.
of the album, but he does say, you know, calls it like the great novelty single or something. So
I was going to
yeah,
say
I think
though,
Don McLean is probably not considered at all as a figure outside of that song. He's almost an ultimate one-hit wonder, even though he literally did have
yeah.
at least, was it one other hit he had?
Well, Vincent was even a bigger
Vincent.
hit than American Pie in Britain. And then
Wow.
later he had the Roy Orbison cover
Okay.
that was a top 10. I was going to say, I thought Kirsty almost had like a sideways compliment. He was almost putting the song down in the way.
Yeah, I didn't think he was. Yeah, I agree with you. It wasn't that
Yeah.
full of.
I should have
praise.
checked. I should have checked Dave Marsh. I did check. I checked the Heart of Rock and Soul, and I think
Yeah.
I found a top 10 or the book of, you know, that book of lists that he put out.
Mm.
I mean, they're
I
under a list called "Shut Up."
What's it called?
There's a list.
Oh yeah,
and I don't know whether it's the original. I don't have.
Oh, okay.
Chuck's on one of the lists. Shut the fuck up.
I didn't know that. That's not why I
Steve
brought it up.
Albini's on there too. I can't. I have no idea why. I can't.
I
remember.
think he had American Pie as his 40th top single of 1972. You know,
Oh,
Well, I was going to say Chris Gow did a top 20 singles thing, and it's
Yeah.
actually his first collection, Any Way You Choose It. and a 10 worst singles of the year, and he put Vincent as number 3 worst single of the
Which
year behind I'd Love to Teach the World to Sing. And
which I like a lot.
yeah, you put New Seekers first and Candyman second, and Vincent third.
Candyman's a good choice, and Vincent is a good choice too. Yeah, I know that list. He's got Rock and Roll Lullaby on it, which is a great pick. And I think
Yeah, 20th.
Burning Love on it. And,
So one thing other about
Backstabbers was his number 1.
So one more thing.
What was his? Sorry, what was his number 1? Sorry about that.
I'll tell you the top 10.
Yeah, tell it.
Just the number 1. What was
Yeah,
it?
okay, well, it's quick. Backstabbers, Layla.
Backstabbers, yes.
I'll Take You There, Alone Again Naturally, School's Out, Oh Girl, Shy Lights, Use Me by Bill Withers, Daydreaming Aretha, Freddie's Dead, and Burning Love by Elvis. That was his top.
Okay. I think I like or love all of those with the exception of, and I know you like it, Chuck Scott. I'm not sure. I've never been crazy about Alone Again Naturally.
Yeah.
And Burning Love, yeah.
I like that list a lot, but I don't think it would have any overlap with my own list if I were to sit down and do a 1972 list. Maybe Backstabbers.
I put the OJ's and Mayfield albums among my top 10 albums. I've never tried to do top singles of any of those years. His next 10 is I Can See Clearly Now, Papa Was a Rolling Stone, Brand New Key, Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard, Zeppelin Rock and Roll, Everything I Own, Bread, Jackson 5, Little Pretty One.
I like that list way better, actually.
Way better.
All the Way, You Wear It Well, and Rock and Roll Love.
Sorry, I was talking over you. What was the third last one? Sorry, like after the Jackson 5, I think.
Go All the Way by the Raspberries.
Right. Okay.
You Wear It Well by Rod Stewart, and Rock and Roll Lullaby by BJ Thomas.
Wow, I love that.
Really
that to me is much closer to my top 10 than his actual top 10. That's great, and I like his actual top 10 as well. But that's a really good list.
Love that he has You Wear It Well on there, and Bread really didn't have any rock critics writing nice things about the own thing.
So another question about 1972. I hope this doesn't overlap with something you said you wanted to talk about.
That's fine. Don't worry about that.
So I do think in the book you're not like you're right about 1972. Obviously, is this very deeply personal time in your life for listening to music, and it does have a little bit of a romantic quality, et cetera, but I do think you are making I don't use the word objective, but there's kind of an objective argument in there too, just about the greatness of pop music in 1972. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do think that it's very underrated, but some of the stuff I love, I don't know that it'll ever change, because you're talking about the Carpenters and Bread and Badfinger. They're kind of at the margin. Badfinger maybe a little less. Carpenters people have come around a bit, but to me that is not just. I always try to differentiate between what is completely subjective. I think I mentioned Climax is Precious and Few. I know that's a junkie song and probably kind of terrible. I just happen to love it because it came along at that same time. But I think there's an objective argument to be made for the Carpenters Superstar and stuff like Everything I Own and Rock and Roll Lullaby. I mean, the neoclassical soul doesn't need that kind of that's revered music kind of across the board. Led Zeppelin, the singles from the Led Zeppelin, they weren't singles, I guess, but the most famous songs from the Led Zeppelin's fourth album. Some of it is considered, does have support among rock critics. Some of it is not liked at all, but I think there's stuff that as you point out, I sort of treat it subjectively, but I do think that it is great. And I think that first half of the year is a great year.
But Phil, can you say that for any year? I mean, I guess when you say that it's underrated, my first question is, are there people who say 1972 was a bad year?
Well, Marcus, I'm probably Marcus has the one, I quoted it in the book. He said it was the least spooky year ever in pop, which I took as just sort of a put down.
Interesting.
Maybe, it's possible that he thinks it's a great year that just wasn't spooky, but I think it was a kind of a roundabout way of saying that it wasn't that interesting a year.
Here's the thing that I was talking about in the back of Mystery Train.
Yeah.
After Superfly came The Deluge, the OJ's Backstabbers number 3 on the charts. We're
Yeah.
Sleeping in the Darkness, which is probably pretty spooky, by the way. Number 16, Stevie Wonder Super.
Oh yeah,
One.
I
Johnny
mentioned Slipping into
Johnny
Darkness.
Nash is Shimmering. I can see clearly now, number 1. Staple Singers, I'll Take You There, number 1. And the Temptations, Papa Was a Rolling Stone, which is also kind of spooky, number 1. Most of them crammed into the last months of 1982. So it seems
I
odd.
think if you focus on the soul music, absolutely. I think it probably is a revered year. Once you get past the soul music, I think people, I found people don't nearly love the singer-songwriter stuff as much as I do. I mean, Stephen Rubio would be a good example. He just didn't put down, he didn't just say he didn't like American Pie. He said he didn't really think much of the singer. A lot of people hate, they consider the Harvest singles kind of whiny.
Yeah, and even
Joni Mitchell
yeah.
has a following, but when you get into things like, and I guess Nielsen does also, but there's singer-songwriter stuff, because certainly the Cat Stevens is loathed, and I like Cat
Paul
Stevens.
Simon isn't. Paul Simon
Isn't, but there's other stuff. It's hit or miss with the singer-songwriters. I think rock critics in general just probably, and again, you can disagree with this, I don't think they really were in love with the idea of singer-songwriters taking over the top 10.
Well,
because I think I would think almost the opposite. I would think rock critics, if anything,
a certain kind of Rolling Stone, definitely a certain kind of Rolling Stone. They still like a Stephen Holden, if you go back. But I think they probably, I think that there were albums, there was music that was meant for albums and music that was meant for the top 40. And I think anybody who came through the 60s loving Motown and loving the Byrds and the Beatles, I don't think they were necessarily crazy about seeing James Taylor at the top of the pop charts. Carole King, yep, she had critical support. Carly Simon had next to none. Although maybe Anticipation. Now, Anticipation there kind of breaks the mold. It's almost not like a singer-songwriter. It is more like a top 40 hit.
What year is You're So Vain? Is that?
You're So Vain comes out in 72, yeah.
Well, that definitely is always that critical.
But something like That's the Way I've Always Heard It Should Be, I don't think rock critics I love that song, and I don't think rock critics have any use for it.
Martina, my ex, put that in her top 100 for Radio
What's
Honor.
that?
Oh, did she?
Martina put that in her top 100 for Radio Honor.
I've always loved that song. But
That's a beautiful
I
song.
think that's almost the epitome of the kind of singer-songwriter stuff that rock critics hate.
And by the way, since you mentioned it, I did one of my only lead reviews ever in Rolling Stone was that Super Hits of the 70s Rhino compilation. And
yeah.
And Have a Nice Day.
Have a Nice Day. That's what.
And I called Precious in View a beautiful song in that, if I remember right. I called it
think it's
heaven music.
I agree with you, Chuck. I think we can probably say that you might be in the minority there. I think you'd have a hard time finding other rock critics.
I think you'd have a hard time before even remembering what. I mean, I don't think people think negatively about it. They'd be like, "What's that?"
And I think I don't know. Maybe it was Steve Pick. Somebody I think misidentified the group that had the original guy from The Outsiders. I think it was Climax.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I think he may have, or somebody identified another group. The Outsiders, Time Won't Let Me.
Sure, Time Won't Let Me, sure.
Yeah, I think that's the guy who ended up in Climax.
Well, there's Climax, and then there's the 80s R&B Climax. And
I hadn't even thought about that.
There's
Climax. I missed a footnoted joke.
KLYMAXX.
I think they did meeting in the ladies' room.
That's right, yeah.
Just in general, though, because look, and this is what I'm interested in. One of my questions was, am I seeing 72 in a way that's just completely different, like completely my own creation? And you made the point. Yeah, definitely the neoclassical soul is revered. I still think that rock critics in general, love the era right up till the Beatles and Dylan end, or not end, the Beatles end, and Dylan kind of, has a fallow period until Blood on the Tracks. And then the 70s for rock critics is disco and punk. And I think there's that, I keep calling it the in-between time. And I just don't know. It's where
Young. I don't.
What's that?
Rock critics loved Neil Young and Joni Mitchell.
Not Harvest.
Okay, guys.
They don't love Harvest nearly as much.
Okay, well, I can see that. There's something.
I think we're
Yeah.
down to our last 20 seconds of
Okay.
this one. So
Okay.
let's not get cut off mid-sentence. So
Yeah,
you know
sure.
the drill after this. But sorry.
So we gotta wait 10 minutes, eh?
I think so. This stupid.
Okay, that's
Zoom.
fine.
Baby, it's you on my mind. Your love is so rare. Being with you is a feeling I just can't compare. And if I can't hold you in my arms, it just wouldn't be fair. 'Cause precious and few are the moments we two can